My name is Alara. I am 18 years old, and for 10 years, my world has been the size of this kitchen. As my family's laughter echoes from the dining room, I sit on a cold stool, listening to the life I'm not a part of. The smell of their Sunday roast mocks my simple plate of leftovers. Their joy feels like a wall I can never climb. But tonight was different. Tonight, the doorbell rang, interrupting their chatter, and I had no idea that the man standing on our porch held a secret that was about to shatter my lonely world forever. It all started when I was 8, right after my real mom passed away. My dad, Mark, who is 48 now, remarried quickly. His new wife, my stepmother Susan, a 45-year-old woman with a smile that never reached her eyes, changed everything. The first time it happened, she said it was because I was a picky eater. "It's just easier this way, honey," she'd said, guiding me to the small kitchen table while her own daughter, Chloe, took my seat at the main table. That one-time solution became a rule etched in stone. For 10 years, every breakfast, lunch, and dinner was a solo affair. I'd hear my stepsister Chloe, now 16, talk about her day at school. I'd hear my dad laugh at one of Susan's jokes. I was a ghost in my own home, close enough to hear their happiness, but always too far to touch it. The isolation carved a hole in me that I didn't know how to fill. The only person who saw me was my grandpa, Arthur. He was my dad's father, a kind man with warm eyes and calloused hands from his years as a carpenter. He hated the rule. Sometimes he'd sneak into the kitchen with a cookie in his pocket. He'd sit with me on the stool, his presence a shield against the loneliness. "You have a fire in you, Alara," he'd whisper. "Don't ever let them put it out." My dad never fought for me. I'd see the guilt in his eyes as he glanced at me in the kitchen before turning back to his new family. His silence was a betrayal that cut deeper than any of Susan's sharp words. He chose his new life, and in it there was no room for me at the table. I was a living reminder of a past he wanted to forget. Grandpa was my anchor. He'd tell me stories about my mother, how much she loved me, how proud she would be. He was the only one who made me feel like I belonged somewhere. He promised me that one day things would be different. He said he was making sure of it. I didn't understand what he meant back then. I just held on to his words like a lifeline. But 6 months ago, my lifeline snapped. Grandpa passed away in his sleep. The day of his funeral was the loneliest I'd ever felt. My family mourned in the living room, accepting condolences from friends. I grieved alone in the kitchen, staring at the empty stool where he used to sit. The last bit of warmth in that house died with him. After he was gone, things got worse. Chloe's teasing became more pointed. "Still enjoying your private dining experience, freak?" she'd sneer from the doorway. Susan's indifference turned into open annoyance, as if my very presence was an inconvenience. I started to believe them. Maybe I was meant to be alone. Maybe I didn't deserve a place at the table. Which brings me back to tonight. The doorbell rang, and my dad answered it. A serious-looking man in a dark suit stood on the porch. He was about 60, with a leather briefcase clutched in his hand. "Good evening," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I'm David Harrison. I was Arthur Miller's attorney." My heart skipped a beat. "Grandpa!" Susan walked to the door, her arms crossed. "We've handled everything related to my father-in-law's passing. What is this about?" she asked, her tone clipped and impatient. Mr. Harrison looked past her, his eyes scanning the house until they landed on me, lingering in the kitchen doorway. "I have some final instructions from Arthur's will that needed to be carried out in person 6 months after his passing," the lawyer explained. "It is imperative that I speak with the entire family. That includes you, Mark, you, Susan, you, Chloe." He paused, his gaze locking with mine, "and especially Ilara." A knot of dread and a flicker of hope tightened in my stomach. No one had said my name with that kind of importance in years. Susan immediately scoffed. "That's not necessary. She can stay in the kitchen. Whatever it is, it doesn't concern her." It was the same dismissal I had heard 1,000 times before. I felt my shoulders slump, ready to retreat back into the shadows. But Mr. Harrison didn't back down. He took a step forward, his expression unyielding as he looked directly at my stepmother. "On the contrary, Susan," he said, his voice dropping to a serious, deliberate tone, "my instructions from Arthur were crystal clear. This matter concerns Ilara most of all. In fact, if she is not in the room for this reading, I am instructed to leave immediately, and you will all forfeit everything he left behind." The air in the hallway crackled with tension. Susan's face, usually a mask of smug control, was pale with fury. My dad just looked at the floor, his shoulders slumped in a way that had become all too familiar. For the first time in 10 years, I wasn't the problem to be hidden. I was the key they couldn't lose. With a sharp, resentful gesture, Susan waved me into the living room. "Fine, get in here, but don't say a word." My feet felt heavy as I stepped onto the plush living room carpet. It felt alien after a decade on cold kitchen linoleum. I chose a small armchair in the corner, as far away from them as possible. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a wild drumbeat of fear and a strange, unfamiliar excitement. Chloe glared at me from the sofa as if this was all my fault. I just kept my eyes on Mr. Harrison. He was my only ally in a room full of Annies. The lawyer sat down, placed his briefcase on the coffee table, and clicked it open. The sound echoed in the suffocating silence. He pulled out a thick envelope. "Arthur was a very methodical man," he began, his voice filling the room. "He knew this day would come. He wanted to ensure his final wishes were understood perfectly without any room for misinterpretation." He looked at my dad. "Mark, Arthur loved you, but he was deeply disappointed." My dad flinched as if he'd been struck. Susan shot him a venomous look. Mr. Harrison continued. "He left you a small sum, enough to get by for a few months. He left Chloe a trust for her college education." Then he turned to Susan. "To you, Susan, he left $1 enclosed in this envelope for the kindness and warmth you showed his granddaughter." The insult was so cold, so precise, it was breathtaking. Susan's face turned a blotchy red. "And now," Mr. Harrison said, his voice softening as he looked directly at me, "we come to the main part of the estate. Arthur's primary asset was not his savings, it was this house." A collective gasp went through the room. My dad looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "This house? Dad told me he put my name on the deed years ago." The lawyer shook his head slowly. "He allowed you to believe that, Mark, but the deed remained solely in his name. He was worried even then that you wouldn't protect what was important." He pulled out a legal document. "According to his last will and testament, Arthur Miller leaves his entire estate, including this house and all property within it, along with the remainder of his savings, to his beloved granddaughter, Ilara." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the blood roaring in my ears. The house was mine. This room, this furniture, the very roof over their heads, it all belonged to me. Chloe's jaw dropped, and Susan looked like she was about to explode. "That's impossible!" Susan shrieked, jumping to her feet. "She's a child! You can't be serious! We'll contest this!" Mr. Harrison held up a hand, his composure unshaken. He anticipated that, which is why he added a final provision. He left a letter. He instructed me to read it aloud if anyone challenged his decision. He pulled a handwritten letter from the envelope. It was my grandpa's familiar, steady script. The sight of it made my eyes burn with tears. "My dearest Ilara," the lawyer began reading, his voice filled with the warmth of my grandpa's words. If you are hearing this, it means I am gone, but I hope my love remains with you. I have watched you grow up in the shadows of your own home, and my greatest regret is not fighting harder for you while I was alive. I am trying to make it right now. This house is yours. It is your security, your foundation. It is the home your mother wanted you to grow up in, filled with love, not silence. He paused, then continued reading, his voice now directed at my dad. Mark, my son, where did you go? The boy I raised would never have stood by and watched his own daughter be treated like an outcast. You let a stranger into your home and let her push your own blood into the kitchen. You chose comfort over courage. I love you, but I do not respect the man you became. I hope one day you find your way back. Every word was a hammer blow, and I saw tears finally stream down my dad's face. He covered his face with his hands, his body shaking with silent sobs. Finally, the letter addressed Susan. To Susan, you did not have to love Alara as your own, but you had a duty to be kind. You chose cruelty instead. You saw a lonely child and chose to isolate her further. You did not build a new family. You broke what was left of an old one. You will get nothing from me but the pity you deserve. The lawyer folded the letter. The air was thick with shame and fury. Susan stared at me, her eyes burning with a hatred so pure it made me shiver.
There is one final condition, Mr. Harrison said, looking at me. Arthur gave you the power, Ilara. You are 18 now, a legal adult. You have two choices. You can sell the house and everything in it and start a new life, or you can choose to allow your family to remain here. The decision is entirely yours. All eyes were on me. My voice, which had been silent for 10 years, was suddenly the only one that mattered. Susan, Mark, and Chloe weren't my family. They were my tenants. I felt a surge of power, a feeling so foreign it almost knocked me over. I could throw them out. I could make them feel as small and as helpless as they made me feel every single day. The vengeful part of me screamed to do it. But then I thought of Grandpa. He didn't do this for revenge. He did this to give me a place at the table. He did this so I would never be invisible again. I stood up, my legs shaky, but my voice surprisingly strong. You can stay, I said, my words cutting through the tension. Susan's eyes widened in shock. You can all stay, but things are going to change, starting right now. I walked over to the dining room, the room that had been forbidden territory for a decade. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down. From now on, I declared, looking each of them in the eye, we eat together, as a family, and this is my seat. My dad looked at me, his face a mess of tears and regret, and nodded slowly. Chloe just stared, her usual smirk gone, replaced by something I couldn't quite read. Susan stood frozen, her face a thundercloud of disbelief and defeated rage. She had lost. Her kingdom of cruelty built within the walls of my grandfather's house had just crumbled to dust. I didn't have to kick them out. I had already taken everything from them. I had taken back my home. I learned that belonging isn't something that's given to you. Sometimes it's something you have to claim. My grandfather didn't just give me a house, he gave me a voice and the power to demand my own place in the world, and I will never, ever eat alone again. Would you have been as merciful in my place? Until the next story.